Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is the 43rd installment of Pinch Hit Friday. This is actually a podcast I've been meaning to record for quite some time in light of a lot of what we saw at the facility earlier this year. We actually saw a barrage of Little League elbow. Kids basically everywhere from ages 9 all the way up to 15, I would say. Several of them actually came from the same team, which is kind of telling in and of itself. A lot of the younger ones were kind of family friends that reached out for advice. It just seems like we see so much of this down in South Florida. So I wanted to touch on it because a lot of the same mistakes apply in all these cases. We see a lot of mistakes being unfortunately repeated across multiple families. So it's uncharted waters for a lot of folks. And I think in general, the medical community actually does a poor job on the whole of managing these. So I wanted to dig into some of the nuances of my experience. Also, it's worthy of note that a lot of this will apply to Little League shoulder as well. And we'll kind of get into what the differences are between them and why these are, basically garbage terms. But some of the same principles will chip in throughout. But, really number one, Little League elbow is a garbage term that basically speaks to bony irritation at the elbow joint. So historically, it referred to the inside of the elbow, so the medial aspect of the joint. Basically, you have a medial epicondyle, a growth plate on it that gets irritated, slightly separated. So this growth plate basically opens up too much or gets super inflamed and creates this medial elbow discomfort. But over the years, though, it's kind of morphed, and you see more and more people coming in with lateral elbow discomfort that doctors are also diagnosing as Little League elbow. So really, what happens in an elbow when you lay your arm back, that fully externally rotated position of throwing, you get medial tensile forces and lateral compressive forces. So with medial tensile forces, there's too much of a stretch on the inside of the elbow. So in more advanced throwers, this is where ulnar collateral ligament tears happen. This is where flexor strains happen. This is where ulnar neuritis kind of comes up. But it can also create a pulling at that medial epicondyle where the flexor and pronator basically both come in and attach on that medial epicondyle. We effectively get overstretched and it pulls, and it can kind of cause that bone to separate or even fracture. So that's a medial tensile force, but at the same time, your elbow on the outside basically closes down. So the humerus, the upper arm, kind of bangs on the radius, the lower arm, and you create this lateral compressive forces. You don't see it as much discomfort here in older players, but you do see it quite a bit in younger players. To be honest, I can remember having this in 7th and 8th grade when I jumped from the little diamond to the big diamond playing third base. It's kind of this outside of the elbow side of things. And so you have medial and lateral discomfort that can all go under this kind of heading of Little League elbow. It's somewhat similar to shin splints. There's a lot of different diagnoses underneath this umbrella, so it is a little bit more of a garbage diagnosis. That said, it doesn't really change the way that we manage these things, but it's important to note that the same throwing motion can cause discomfort from a bony standpoint in multiple different places in the elbow. Number two, it usually happens with big jumps in stress. So, typically this is more baseball, right? This is a 8 to 10-year-old athlete playing 60 games in 2 months, right? Or it's a jump to a bigger diamond, right? That's a big discussion point in the baseball community, having to throw the ball significantly further across the diamond, or the mound is further away from the plate. The other thing that's a big jump in stress is actually a growth spurt. There was an article actually that just came out this month in the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine. The title was Effects of Weight, Height, and Related Parameters on Elbow Varus Torque in Collegiate and Professional Baseball Pitchers. The lead author was Slowick. And they actually found that, basically there was a strong correlation of varus torque, which creates this valgus stress that can cause pain on both the inside and the outside of the elbow. Basically there was a strong correlation with weight, and then weight times height, and then also a moderate correlation with body mass index. So basically this stuff accounted for 38% of elbow varus torque, with weight as the main contributor. So if you're a kid that shot up 6 inches in 6 months, two things are happening. One, you're throwing the ball exponentially harder, which the forces in of itself create a lot of challenges. So this is, kind of a big deal. But the other aspect of it is that typically if you've grown a lot, you're bigger, you're stronger than your counterparts, you're also more likely to get overused. So it's kind of this double whammy for the kids that matured really quickly. So watch for big jumps in stress, including big growth spurts. Number three, Little elbow is frequently misdiagnosed. It's a challenging thing because you're kind of at that age range where you go directly to your pediatrician, and unfortunately, there's a lot of pediatricians that may only have a cursory knowledge of some of these musculoskeletal conditions, and they just say, "Hey, go rest it, and you'll be good to go." I think we also see scenarios where we've seen kids referred directly to to orthopedic offices, and it's not as necessarily a sexy thing that a lot of the well-known orthos are seeing a ton of. And instead, actually, these cases often get punted to the physician's assistant that may be there, because they almost are always conservative management. So, in many cases, there's an X-ray. It may underestimate the severity. I think that's especially common maybe when you have a young kid who's squirmy and they're doing an X-ray and there's a lot of motion artifacts and maybe the read's not as good. And there are times when this does need to be punted to better diagnostic imaging to truly evaluate whether there's something more significant going on there. So I think there's challenges in the diagnostic trend in terms of who's actually involved and what imaging is used. But I think just as importantly, sometimes we get people who just really aren't ready to do the really important patient communication and counseling, right? These are discussions where you have to be extremely, descriptive. You have to be very, very black and white with what the expectation is. You are not going to pick up a baseball for the next 6 weeks. During that time period, you are going to do physical therapy 2 days a week. And once you get to the 6 week mark, you are going to start this exact throwing program that I'm handing to you. Also, alongside of that, I want you to do this kind of strength conditioning, whatever it may be. I think a lot of times it's a very quick conversation. Oh, give it 6 weeks and you'll be good to go. And unfortunately, parents and kids leave the office happy that it wasn't something more significant, but they also wind up confused 2 weeks later when they're starting to plan out what their travel ball schedule looks like and all that. Number three, I think you have to view this as the check engine soon light that's coming on your car. It's your body screaming that what you're doing isn't working. You really need to reevaluate your competition density, right? So was it too many games in a season? Was it too many games in a weekend? Was it too many throws in a short window? Was it nonstop baseball throughout the year? Was it all of these things, right? The ones that we actually tend to see this the most on are catchers, right? They go and they catch 5 games in a weekend. They throw more than anybody on the field, often with kind of lazy mechanics. Or we see that pitcher that goes and throws 80 pitches and then they go to shortstop right afterwards. Or it's the kid that comes in from standing around in right field and doesn't get enough warm-up throws and he sets it back. You just realize, especially with kids who throw very hard for their age, the margin for error is really, really thin. So you have to be really calculated in where we use our throws and what time of year we're doing them. Number five, I think this is a good reminder of the active versus passive restraint dynamic. So, in terms of active restraints in your body, you have muscles, you have tendons. These are things that can get stronger in response to, training stress, right? And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have passive restraints like your labrum, your meniscus, your intervertebral discs. These things don't really get stronger, as you go through things. And in fact, they get dinged up and they often wind up being, surgical fixes in more advanced cases. Bone is kind of decidedly in the middle, right? On one hand, it does remodel and get stronger in response to appropriate stress, right? I had a DEXA scan during my first year of powerlifting and I gained almost 1/3 of a pound of bone body wide, right? We certainly see like DEXA scans on pitchers' upper arms and the bone density is astronomically higher. The only thing that we don't realize is that these bones don't remodel nearly as quickly as muscles and tendons. So it's kind of like the callus versus the blister. With the bones, you're much more likely to get the blister versus the muscles and tendons, you're going to get the callus. So I think when a bone gets overloaded, it's typically when active restraints aren't doing their job, right? So all this is to say, that you want to get muscles and tendons stronger. So this is an excellent time to get involved in strength conditioning, both because it mechanically makes important muscles and tendons stronger and more elastic, and because it helps athletes to redistribute stress across multiple joints, right? So a lot of times that elbow is paying the price because the shoulder, the core, the lower half are not doing their jobs. So I think, it's a great time to get going with that. Keep in mind that there are going to be situations where an acute growth plate injury might be a little bit more flared up, and more rigid rest on the front end might be necessary. I'd say that's probably, 10% of the cases we've seen over the years are really that significant that you just can't do much of anything. And maybe you do, the good arm only and leave the other one out on all your strength and conditioning stuff. But really big picture, symptoms are going to be your guide with this. So number 6, last but not least, always give it more time than you think you need, right? This is something I'm super direct on with kids and parents when I see these things. Too often we hear just rest 6 weeks, but kids are dumb. They will find a way to have setbacks. And I think some of the communication issues that we see from medical providers are a real thing. Like I said, I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone say, just rest 6 weeks, and a parent and kid think that they're going to be back pitching in a game on the 43rd day, right? Asymptomatic and ready to return are very different things. So it's important to do physical therapy, gradually build up your throwing and your hitting volume. And you have to ease your way back into competition, right? Maybe it's the kind of thing where you only throw an inning versus 5 innings. Maybe it's the kind of thing where you play second base instead of shortstop. And I think this is one of the reasons why we see so many setbacks in this population, is just because kids get their competitive juices flowing and they jump right back into the craziness, and it creates a collection of problems for them. So big picture, sometimes this is a blessing in disguise. If a young athlete learns from it, he and his parents and coaches kind of course correct and understand how they need to attack things differently. And a lot of times they get, really involved in, arm care and full body conditioning, as they're exposed to physical therapy and strength conditioning during this down period. It's a great chance to take up a new sport. Like, you got a bad elbow, go play soccer, right? Pick up something that, allows you to develop in different ways. We know that early sports specialization, really in the age range that's most susceptible to a little league elbow, is going to be the worst possible thing you can do for long-term development. So hope you found this helpful, and by all means, feel free to comment or send us an email if you'd like more elaboration on this. We deal with a lot of these cases, and we'd be happy to give you some direction. Have a great weekend.
Overuse injuries have emerged as one of the biggest threats to players at every level of competition. As an example, at the professional level, ulnar collateral ligament injuries at the elbow alone sideline pitchers for an average of over 17 months. That's a ton of lost development and a threat to lengthy careers. Just as concerningly, though, for youth players, overuse is the predominant mechanism of injury. So what can be done? Obviously, we need to train athletes to be prepared for all the stresses the game throws at them. However, the other side of the equation, recovery, often doesn't get the attention it deserves. Healthy, recovered arms mean you can stay in the game and give your best on the field, and that's where Mark Pro comes in. Mark Pro is a cutting-edge recovery tool that provides all the benefits of active recovery, but without the extra effort, muscular fatigue, or stress to tendons and joints. Players can use Mark Pro as long as needed for exceptional recovery between training sessions or after games. We'll often send Mark Pro units back with athletes to their hotels, or even have them use them on team flights. Both easy to use and portable, Mark Pro is a powerful tool that allows recovery anywhere, anytime. Use it while relaxing at home, on the road, or during tournaments. On a personal note, I was originally a naysayer when it came to Mark Pro. However, longtime Cressey sports performance athlete Corey Kluber turned me on to it. He adopted Mark Pro into his post-pitching recovery approach, and it was an integral part of him going out and throwing 200 innings year after year. This led me to experiment with it myself and with more of our athletes, and the feedback was consistently outstanding. Now, just a few years later, you'll see it in every major league organization as part of the routines of some of the most accomplished baseball players on the planet. If you're looking for the same results enjoyed by these athletes, visit markpro.com and use the coupon code Cressey at checkout for an exclusive discount. Again, that's markpro.com, markpro.com, and use the coupon code Cressey, Cressey, at checkout for an exclusive discount.